Recording started.
We go there for entertainment.
All right.
How about next door?
Get these going somewhere.
I was gonna say, there's no way to make it any semi-lighter in here, is there?
It's all or nothing apparently.
Well, I'll be in the dark. I don't mind. That's good.
Because people watch their own.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Actually, I think if you open the blinds, it may not be that bad.
Burgers, fish, they got all of them.
So fried stuff. Oh, do that? No. Pack my lunch.
So, this is a talk I gave at Dog Food Con, Microsoft conference. It was pretty well received. It's a cloud talk. It's this, I don't know how close it'll be to what Steve's doing, but she's doing a cloud talk next door as well. So yeah, we will give it a moment here.
So is the importance of asset management not taking place?
No, he is sick. The Sturiano from PayPal and then Tyler Smith from StealthCare, they're friends, and they both have gotten each other sick somehow. Yeah. I have no idea how they managed to do that. It's a good thing I did not meet with them last week like they had wanted to. Otherwise, I would be probably sick with them too. So, these days, all in the luck of the draw. So, just to let you know, everything that I'm going to present today, it's my opinion, not my employer's. My tweets are my own. If you get offended easily, you probably don't want to follow me. I'm not going to go into anything about my employers in any detail or extent. If you want to talk about some ideas, some strategies, more than willing to do that, get in some info. But I got to be careful to walk a fine line. I don't want to necessarily give away everything that my employer is doing or their strategy for the next 5 years. So, in general, sorry, you guys just missed the disclaimer talk. I promise not to tell anybody anything about my employers. And neither should you.
Huh?
It's simple. The cloud to me is really easy. It's someone else's hard drive. Can sit in multiple countries, shared by lots of people, but it's still just somebody else's hard drive. A lot of people, they're mystified by the cloud. They get completely... And I will admit, I did start out this slide presentation a little bit easier to get people into it, because sometimes I don't know who's going to be in here and the extent that they're going to know about it. So we'll kind of get easy, and then we're going to start getting into some more interesting topics here. So what are you really doing when it comes to using the cloud? You're counting on the fact that somebody else is going to keep your data separate. There's no real security in the cloud. I can't tell you how many times, and I will rant on vendors today a little bit, and salespeople a little bit, because I'm constantly going back and trying to work with cloud vendors to say, okay, so where does your security end and my security begins? It's that easy. They can't ever answer the question. They honestly can't. You know, you look at Amazon, they're probably the furthest ahead, and they're like, well, we got to go back and talk to some attorneys, and we'll get back with you on that answer. So it's a soft sell. Everyone goes, well, you know, you're safe. Well, you know, we're Microsoft, or we're IBM, or we're Amazon. We have all these great things that we can do for you. It's sold softly, but the reality is that, guess what? It's still somebody else's hard drive, and you're sharing it with everybody else. So, three different types of clouds that they have out there. You've got SaaS, which most people are probably more accustomed to, like where you got Salesforce, or you kind of even think of it like eBay as a platform. eBay is its own little platform. PayPal is a platform. Most people are pretty comfortable with those. When you start getting into PaaS environments, you've got like Microsoft Azure. Start thinking of like SQL Server in the cloud. Strategically targeted type of services that you're trying to do. You're trying to run a database in the cloud. Hopefully nobody's running MongoDB. If you are, you probably have a lot more problems. You didn't make it here today. But platforms in the cloud, fairly popular. And then finally you get to IaaS. IaaS is what I think about when I think of like Amazon, right? I just go out there and build whatever I want. I build it from scratch. I got to do my own networking. I got to do everything from scratch. Got to do it all. Gotta VLAN everything, gotta manage my subnets, gotta do everything. That's the one that kind of worries me when it comes to developers running their cloud infrastructure. And it's not to pick on developers, it's just that developers are trying to get something done. It's a different mindset. It's the same as what I think of, when developers go out there and they start jigging around the cloud and they just start setting up VLANs randomly. Well, sometimes they can set them up so that it's easier to manage, and other times they can set them up so that it's harder to manage. Okay? So right now, you'll see this line down here at the bottom. It's estimated that an average enterprise has between 600 to 1,000 SaaS applications running in their environment. Everything from ServiceNow to Chronos to you name it. And when they say 600 to 1,000, it's all of the shadow IT that's going on in the background that most people don't know about. How are they moving things around? How are they doing their project management? You name a function. If somebody has a need and they need to get it done quickly, they will simply reach out to the cloud and they will just do it without your involvement in IT. Especially if IT is viewed as some type of inhibitor, or if IT is viewed as an expense that's more expensive than just going out in the cloud. Why do I need Microsoft Project when I can just go out in the cloud and get a project app that's ready to go and I spend $100 a month? I'd rather bill it out over $100 a month anyways. So you see more and more things going to those micropayment type of schedules. So this right here is a cloud security responsibility matrix. I actually stole this from somebody else. We're going to talk about who I stole it from in a little bit. But what you'll see is that on the local on-prem here on the far right, you're responsible for everything. You own it all. Everything in the cloud you've got to do. So when I do that, I've got to go ahead and do everything myself. When I go to IaaS, you'll see, well, they'll take care of some of the hardware problems for me. But from OS on up, it's really my problem. As you keep moving towards SaaS, eventually you get into this shared responsibility. The reason why SaaS is, people will say, oh, it's still the vendor takes care of it all. I don't agree with that, so I did modify this. The reason why, and we'll go into it, is that you're still responsible for the users of this. Okay? You're still responsible for how you're going to administer your users. If you think about it, authorized jerks, if someone's authorized, they can do whatever they want. That's still your responsibility. The vendor, they don't have any say in that. It's still your problem. So ultimately, it does come back to the fact that you own this issue. So even when you have SaaS apps, there's a certain point where the liability, you can't get rid of it. And the vendor's going to say, well, they had Joe Schmo's ID and password, so it's not really our problem. They didn't really break into us. You had a password leak. So the example that I use here is the pizza as a service, right? So if you decide to, kind of open your own pizza restaurant, that's the far left. That's your on-prem. Everybody who has everything on-prem, you're a pizza restaurant. If you go with something like an Amazon, basically it's like it's kind of like DiGiorno. They pack everything up for you, and they put it in that nice package, and you put it in your oven and you cook it. So you're dining at home. Platform as a service is kind of like Pizza Hut, where they cook everything, they do everything, they deliver it to you, and you go ahead and you eat. And then finally, when you're dining out, you've got your, upscale La Rosa's or your Giordano's or wherever place you like to go eat fancy pizza at, right? California Pizza Kitchen, that's upscale. So when you get to SaaS, basically you're going out to eat in general. You still take the responsibility of, cutting your own pizza or eating your own pizza and, could they have made the pizza bad and poisoned you? Yes. But the reality is that you're going out to eat and you're enjoying your pizza. So when we think about those two worlds, that's probably the easiest way to kind of comprehend cloud in general. All right. So with that said, let's talk about some important things here. So when we talk about your data in the cloud, you do have security requirements. All of those 5 requirements that we have to do in the regular world, you still have to do in the cloud. Okay? And you need to hammer those out with your vendors, with your cloud vendors. What I typically find is the cloud vendors don't want to talk about this. The cloud vendors, they want to talk about everything else, including selling you more new services. than really getting into the, well, who owns these problems. Well, technically speaking, if it's your data, and that's the reason why you're in the cloud, it's your problem. Okay? I can't emphasize that enough. When you start digging into the contracts in the cloud, they're 9/10 garbage. You've taken all the liability, and to some degree, if you think about it, you're saving money by sticking this stuff in the cloud, by sharing an instance with all these other people. You've written away some of your liabilities, or at least some of your ability to come back on them. Worst case scenario, they're going to close up shop, and they'll set up shop as something new, and they'll fold. So, all types of different ways that we can do this. If we think about this prior solution, could I have kind of like the Pizza Hut takeout place where I've got a couple tables and it's mainly takeout? I could do that. So I could do hybrid. I could do a hybrid cloud. Am I going the wrong way? I think I am. Sorry. So you can do hybrid models where you kind of do a couple pieces of each. Oftentimes where you think about hybrid cloud, it's usually something where it's on-prem and something that's in the cloud. Okay? So, areas where you almost have to do that, you start thinking of, Microsoft Active Directory. You start thinking of critical directory type services. You start thinking of file and print services. Could you put it all in the cloud? You could, but if your connection is ever severed, it's going to be a bad day, which I found out about that about a week ago. Accountability. I still have a business owner, I have a technical owner, a process owner. So when we think about the business owner, that's the person who said, oh, I want to get Office 365. My people can't live without it. We don't need Lotus Notes anymore. We have to have Office 365. We have to have this. We have to have that. For one reason or another, they needed some application out in the cloud. The technical owner is usually the person who's going to get stuck with supporting it. So the application support team owner. And then finally, you got like a process owner. That's usually the person who's on the service end of it. Some of the technical requirements, and we're going to go through these because a lot of these things are going to impact what we're going to talk about here in a second. But two-factor authentication is critical. If you think about this, if all I need is an ID and password to break into your cloud instance, it's not a very hard thing to essentially run up a bill on you in the cloud. If anybody runs a lab in the cloud, one of the biggest things I can tell you, unless you're doing two-factor authentication, even if you are, I would almost tell you to use prepaid debit cards, simply because of the fact that you don't want your credit card in there. I have had some friends that had they had labs in the cloud and they forgot to turn something off, or somebody's gotten into it. And again, it doesn't take long to actually throw a site up. They came out the next day with like a $1,000 bill, simply because they were hosting malware and they decided just to go ahead and run the bill up. So it's something you might want to consider when you start thinking about the cloud. If your account's compromised, you're going to have a bad day. Two-factor authentication anymore, it's going to become the norm. It really is. And even inside environments, it's becoming the norm. If we think about business intelligence, I want to grab some information in the cloud. So I want to siphon data out. Oftentimes that could be in the form of logs or the use of an API. Encryption, always critical, whether it's sitting at rest or in transit. Data loss prevention type services and verification services. Okay. When we get to the stakeholders, who are some important parties to consider in here? Well, we got legal and procurement. Why? Simply because of the fact that your legal team hopefully talked about and negotiated that cloud contract. I can't tell you how much shadow IT I've seen appear where the legal and procurement had to try to go back in, and it's like trying to put the genie back in the bottle. You can't do it. It doesn't work well. Okay? So you need to have them on the front end, and you need to have them negotiating, even though you may want a certain vendor. Let's say, for example, it's between Box and Dropbox, and you like Dropbox. Well, guess what? Dropbox wouldn't sign the company NDA. They wouldn't even sign an NDA with us. And they also insisted that the data belonged to them. They actually did. We did not do any business with them, and we've told everyone who has a Dropbox account that they're using for work that if they use it and we find out, you'll be answering to whatever higher power that there is and discussing that with them, because they wouldn't even sign the NDA. So these are the reasons why you have to get legal and procurement involved right away. You cannot wait. You really have to get them in the beginning. Of course, you want information security. You also want to know architecture-wise, how are you going to fit this into your current environment? A lot of people, what they'll do is they'll just throw something out in the cloud, and the next thing you know, it becomes production. And then, for whatever reason, a connection gets dropped, and they're just stuck. So now your app's down, and no one knows how it works. Oftentimes, you can find this ad hoc type of growth model. It happens. As well as infrastructure teams, even the networking team. How am I going to route traffic to and from it? How is the VPN going to work? How do I move my data in and move my data out? Is it all web APIs, or is it through an encrypted VPN tunnel? So we've got to get those people involved early. All right. So one thing I want to do, I mentioned this earlier, classification or kind of the responsibility of SaaS apps. You'll see on here that like SOCs, all those things, those are still my responsibility. Really, the vendors just got to support me. That's all they're going to do. They're going to build the app, take care of the app. I think about something like ServiceNow. They do everything next to wipe my nose. I'm still responsible for the user management, and I'm still responsible for the data that's sitting inside there. Which means if I give somebody authorization to go view it and they go share it with the rest of the world, it's not ServiceNow's problem, it's my problem. So there is a shared layer of responsibility in there when it comes to the application. I'm still required to do those 3 critical IT security type of functions. Hopefully they've got encryption taken care of for you, and hopefully it's got non-repudiation built into this model. But I'm still responsible for authentication, authorization, and audit. Who's allowed to do what? That's still my problem. So let's get into some of the issues then when we talk about cloud. So multi-tenancy. So the whole point of the cloud was to make things cheap. And I think the cloud has achieved cheap. If you think about what you can do in the cloud these days versus even 3 years ago, it's incredible. The only thing that the vendor, as I mentioned earlier, is there to do for you is to basically keep your data separated from the person next to you. That's all they're really there to do. Security is a distant afterthought. Oftentimes the vendors will turn around and say, well, we've got security taken care of. We've got a firewall out there. The firewall is actually there to keep your data from being commingled with another person's data. That's it. That's all it really comes down to. It's kind of sad, but that's where you start getting into things with the vendors, and then that's usually when the relationship with the vendor starts getting a little bit more strained. Because that's all they're really there to do. If you go and you look at the contracts of IBM or Google or Microsoft, that's really all they're paid to do. So what do we have from a risk standpoint? We've got data leakage, we've got misconfiguration issues. You do have a risk of crossover between tenants. So far you haven't really seen that happen, but it's still a risk. What's my real benefit? Lower costs. That's all I'm doing. That's the reason why multi-tenancy works, is that I go in there along with everybody else, and we all use Office 365, and we save a lot of money. Some mitigation strategies. I could go ahead and have an isolated resource where I could have maybe a hybrid solution of sorts. I could also guarantee where I encrypt the data myself. But this is a hard thing to try to mitigate, simply because of the fact that you have made this bet that they're not going to get compromised. This is the big risk where if the cloud provider is compromised, everyone's having a bad day. So we're not alone. At least we can say, well, all these other companies got hit. That's about the only saving grace that we have. API security. This is how most large cloud hacks have happened so far. Not a guaranteed thing that it's always going to be this way, but so far the big cloud hacks that have occurred have come through APIs, or poorly secured APIs. We start looking at this, you start looking at APIs, it allows me to do all types of different requests. Oftentimes those requests are running as administrator. So, simple things such as, running them over a VPN tunnel between me and my cloud provider, and not letting anyone else inside the tunnel. At least it's now insiders. That's a good way to mitigate it. But at a minimum, I got to be careful. If somebody can get their hands on the credentials for my API, or if I send those in the clear and somebody gets their hands on them, guess what? I'm in for a bad day. I'm trying to remember the name of the company out of Florida that had that happen, and their entire business went away in a day. Happened in, I think it was 2013, 2014. They're based out of Central Florida. I know. I completely forgot it, like the Microsoft conference too. Anyhow, the vendor was here one day and gone the next. They literally vanished overnight. These guys got in, I'm assuming guys, could be ladies too, girls are hackers too. Some people got in, they got into into this company's business, and they essentially began to extort them. When they realized that they were trying to run a recovery, they just erased everything. They lost all their business overnight, and they didn't have anything backed up. So
Code space is my...
Code space, yes, thank you. Yes, Code space was here today, gone tomorrow the next. It really was that bad and that quick. So when we think about the risk, as we mentioned, known vulnerabilities against them, misconfigurations, sending API information in the clear. What are the benefits of APIs? Well, I think we all probably can attest that APIs are really convenient. I can share data really easily. I love APIs for myself, because I like to take data in and out of ServiceNow like crazy, because I don't want to have people spend time in Excel killing spreadsheets and killing time and wasting resources when it's as simple as a lookup in ServiceNow or some other asset management system. Why spend my time trying to do that? Mitigation strategies here. Again, we kind of mentioned them earlier. Encrypt the heck out of it. I'd even consider putting in a VPN between your critical systems, as well as testing the security of your API. So go in and run that pen test against your API, or run that vulnerability assessment / web application security assessment that you can do. Check out your APIs and make sure they look secure. Don't just take it for granted. Cloud portability. What's great about the cloud? Another great thing we can do with the cloud is we can turn around and we can take our data and we can move it overseas and bring it back overseas. So, later on we're going to talk about some international issues. If I have German data on citizens, it's a citizen's data from Germany, I've got to keep that data within the borders of Germany. Okay, I got restrictions, I understand that. However, if I don't have that type of data, I could put that data anywhere else in the world. And let's say I was based out of Japan, I might want to have that data out of Japan rather than keeping it in the United States. The great thing about cloud portability is it allows me to pick my data up and just move it wherever I want. Problem with that is that if I'm a bad guy and I get in, I can do denial of service on you and pick up your data and move it to where you don't know where it went. Make your life a really hard time. I also can lock you in with a vendor. So if you think about it, if I've got my data inside, I don't want to mention any vendors, but if I've got vendor A and vendor A makes it a really hard time for me to move data around, odds are the data I want to leave them, it's probably going to be a hard thing to try to move my data out as well. It's pretty much a pretty easy assumption on that. That's another thing you probably want to mention in your contract as well. I've seen that one get burned with people before too. As well as services where they're very proprietary and I can't move things around. That's the biggest problem that you'll have to be on the lookout for with, I wouldn't say small providers, but some providers that are more regionally based. If you use an international provider in general, they don't care what you do with your data. In fact, most of them are doing them where you're either paying daily or monthly or something like that. What's the beauty of cloud portability? Well, it really gets back to business continuity and disaster recovery. Those are the two big things that you get for cloud portability. So you think about kind of like 9/11, how people had data centers live in New York and in the World Trade Center. CIO makes the phone call, moves everything over to their backup data center, boom, like that. You can do the exact same thing in the cloud, but even easier. You don't make a phone call, you just hop online and you say just switch from East Coast to West Coast. It's that easy. So mitigation strategies, really you got to develop this in continuity with your DR plan. You've got to think about how you're going to develop cloud portability in your DR plans. So again, if you're based out of Central Ohio, although it is convenient to keep some of your data around Central Ohio, you might want your backup copy to be out in Oregon. So if you're using Amazon, you might want to bounce it between those two locations. So you'll have your primary data here working, and then maybe you send backup copies out to Oregon. That way, if there's ever a problem with the copies here in Ohio, you can still function just fine. Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure that I'm not going too far over. Okay. So, cloud reliability. It's kind of interesting because I've said this before, and some people don't necessarily agree with it. When you start going to the cloud, in my opinion, things get more complex. And the reason why they get more complex is because the relationship with the vendor complicates things when compared to being on-prem. When you're on-prem, it's your data center. You can do whatever you want. When you go to the cloud, I'm now trying to use somebody else to manage certain elements for me, do certain things for me, and guess what? I've got to work through them. So it slows things down. It makes things a little bit more time, costly. The big thing I would say when I'm thinking about the cloud itself is that when I think about vendors and I think about what I'm saving, I typically find I save money, but I don't necessarily save time on the setup. Okay? Do I have something?
No, I was just.
I thought it was a signal.
The cost thing. There's a point like where certain organizations start to find out, depending upon like the logging and stuff like that you're doing, that cost benefit disappears pretty quick.
It's true. I mean, it's amazing. The example I can give you is this: is that where I was before, we used a cloud-based MSS, managed security service. They weren't bad. They actually used the exact same tool set that we had. We had QRadar. They used the exact same thing. But once our staff got familiar enough with it, guess what? We went out, we cleaned up the problems, we took care of the issues, and in 6 months, the vendor called us one time about an attack that was going on, and we were like, what do we do about it? What would be your advice? And I remember asking the guy that. What would you say I should go do? Well, shut it down. Well, obviously. What else should I do? Well, thanks for the update. I'm going to go to bed because it's 4:30 in the morning, and if I'm going to call the firewall team right now, the firewall team is going to tell me to go pound salt until at least 7:30 in the morning, but I'll send them an email. So someone's attacking us. What do we do? Block that IP address. Okay, what are they going to do? Go to another IP address. So when I think about the cloud, I do think that you're simply trading. You're moving around your expenses. That's all you're really doing. Instead of having certain capital expenses and labor expenses, you're just sticking it out in the cloud. And you're taking people and you're having to spend more time with them. So when you think about the risk here, you start to have a skills atrophy. Okay? And I'm not saying that you're going to keep everyone on-prem. No, that's not it. In fact, more and more things are going to move to the cloud. Everybody's sticking everything in the cloud. But you do have that risk of certain skill sets walking out the front door. So you do need to keep that in mind. The benefits, I get a higher level of service at a lower cost. That's, I think about like a managed security service. That's really what they do. They have forensic experts or incident response experts that are supposed to be there to take care of questions. I also have some redundancy and load balancing, network security. I have a bunch of nice perks in there built in. The way that I would mitigate this is I might want to have a hybrid cloud option. That was really effective with us until finally we got rid of our MSS. Because we weren't using it enough. We didn't think it was worth the $200,000 we were spending on a year on it. As well as just setting up documentation and making sure that people knew what the heck they were doing. So when it comes to cloud reliability, a lot of different ways that you can do this. If someone, the magic backhoe comes along and it severs your connection outside, guess what? Now you don't have a cloud service. So, data encryption. Now, here's what's interesting. We all talk about encrypting our data, right? We all talk about protecting our systems. What happens when we encrypt our data and we lose the keys? It happens. What's that? Bye-bye data. You now have data that's encrypted that you can no longer touch. So, if you're going to go through the trouble of encrypting your data on storage or on-prem or wherever, make sure that you have a way to get your data back. Where you start to find that there's problems are sometimes vendors will offer up custom tooling, like custom encryption tools. However, has anyone really asked, well, how often do you test those tools? When I asked all 3 vendors that we work with, how often they test their encryption tools? Never. It just works. Well, how does key escrow manage? How do you do and how do you handle key escrow? Well, it's all proprietary. It's top secret. Here's what I would say. If you're really going to go through the hassle of doing this, set up your own key escrow and test the hell out of it. Just some advice. Simply because I have been in that position before where people have encrypted their data, and I look at it and I just laugh at them. And I go, yeah, who do you want to send it out to? There's some people we can send it to, but understand something. It's $300 an hour, and maybe after $20,000 you'll have something to talk about, and maybe you won't. How high of a bill do you want to run up? And they're just like, oh. So make sure that you do have the ability to recover. Make sure you test your recovery. Make sure that you're doing that probably beforehand. Again, the problem with the cloud is things are really easy to set up. You can set up things within an hour, not even an hour. You go out to AWS and I can have a server spun up inside of about 4 minutes. Doesn't mean that I'm necessarily ready to start sticking data on it. The benefits, we can minimize the potential for data loss. Again, if somebody gets into my database in the cloud, it's good that it's encrypted. I can also structure my approach that I'm going to do for data management. So when I start thinking about, I start thinking about my data protection piece, I'm going to have encryption from the application server on out. I can also put in place fault tolerance and disaster recovery. So I can do a lot of different things that can really help me out. The biggest thing I would say is I definitely set up, your data access strategy. So I'd set up some type of DAS, and I'd also set up an independent key management service if you're really going to run it. Many of the SaaS providers also do the same thing. Salesforce, Dropbox, or not Dropbox, Box. Even ServiceNow, you can do independent key management. So then that way your data is protected, especially if you think that you're going to put sensitive data out there, which in the case most people do. I think they estimate that about 20% of all cloud data is considered internal sensitive data. Like it's got credit cards, associates mixed in, lots of different things. That came from Sky High, by the way. Security as a service, a CASB. So we could have an entire talk on CASBs. If you've ever heard of like a Sky High or a Netscope, those guys are CASBs. CASBs are really good. They're basically, services that are in the cloud, and they essentially help you either audit or understand the security of your cloud-related services. So they do a number of different things where they can intercept it, they can inspect it while it's sitting in the cloud. It just depends on how you want to do it. To me, I kind of lump them all together in this big cloud or CASB type of environment, simply because of the fact that one of the big risks I see is that they're oftentimes improperly positioned as a service. So a good example is I'm looking for a cloud DLP service provider. I can't tell you how many people who came out, at least from a salesperson, said, oh yeah, we do that. And I said, well, let's talk about it. And then they spoke, and then I say what I wanted, and they're like, yeah, and the SE or the engineer is going, no, we don't do that. That's not how it works. So what you find is that with CASBs are that they usually do something very, very well. And in some cases, they only do it for Microsoft, or they only do it for Amazon, or they only do it for Google, or they only do it for IBM. I typically am looking for the ones that can do it across all. I also, if I'm looking for SaaS apps, I'm looking for ones that can cover the bulk of my critical SaaS apps. So I got to take a couple steps to find out those critical applications that are really going to matter to me. In my environment right now, what we're trying to do is we're trying to work down from probably, again, 800 SaaS apps down to about 100. We only want to be able to work with 100 SaaS apps. It sounds like a lot. We've got our top 20 identified simply because we know who we spend the most money with. That's pretty easy to do. But, again, we've got probably a couple hundred that we need to go find out what the answer is. So we're looking at using a CASB to go out, find those, those kind of missing services, find those ghost services, and pull them back in. The biggest thing here is that security is a foundation. What I found that this really gets back to is process. Doing my due diligence, understanding what are they really going to deliver for me, what are they going to do, and doing testing ahead of time. Don't just go out and buy it. Test the heck out of these things, and my advice is always get 3 vendors. Get 3 vendors. They all say they can do it. I keep going through. I can tell you a really good one that I ran recently was ran an RFI where we started out with 8 vendors. By the time we got to the last bottom 3, one of the bottom 3 actually, because of political reasons and legal reasons, completely dissolved. So we were really down to 2 options. It just quickly started just falling off. As we started digging into it, because I started out with like 21 questions, and that evolved into 79 questions, and then evolved into another 100, about 120 questions. By the time we started really digging into the vendors and asking them these tougher questions, then all the kind of the details came out, and things started to fall apart for some of the vendors. Real quickly, we found out like the recovery time for one vendor was 79 hours. Well, you do the math on that, that's almost, over 3 days? It's too long. We can't be down for 3 days. Not 3 days continuously. So, as we started going through there, we wanted something that was less than 8 hours. And actually, we wanted something that was less than 5. Some vendors would be like, they can't really meet that requirement. That's ridiculous. Yeah, they could. You just had to hunt around. So again, do your due diligence. Go through, do your process, work the process, and try to run things down as hard as you can. CASB services are great, but you have to understand what you're getting yourself into. When we think about traditional security migrated to the cloud, can I get cloud-based firewalls and IPSs and reverse proxies? Yes. Every one of them sells them. Amazon sells them to IBM, to you name it. Everybody has them out in the cloud. The real question is, what are they going to do for you out in the cloud? Recently, when working with some semi-technical people, they said, well, all you do is stick a firewall out there, right? And we're good? Well, yes, but firewalls inspect at layer 3, and you're looking for something to inspect at layer 7. And that's when we started getting into it, and they started realizing real quickly here that they were going to meet a checkbox, which is great for the auditors, but it wasn't really that good for us in reality. When we started digging into it, we're like, okay, so what is this? Well, it's a custom-based application. There's all these really cool, neat things. What's it written in? Oh, I don't even have an idea what it's written in. So we needed to go out and figure out what was the code written in, develop a better strategy for sticking something in front of there to, do better security than just making ourselves feel better. We think about traditional security in the cloud. The risk is improperly positioned services again. I can't tell you, like, people have found out, like, oh, you guys are going to the cloud. That's great. How can I help you with that? And I go, what do you have as a cloud service? And they're like, well, we offer this little thing. Could it fit in? I'm like, nah, not really. You really have to look at what you're doing. Even for what I'm doing personally right now, I've already, told my company that we are not going to bet anything more than a year for any contract on cloud, because we don't really know where it's going to ship next. So we'll go year to year, and as we sort things out, we're going to hopefully begin to expand that into maybe a 3-year contract with someone. But we're not going to go out and say, let's bet 5 years on this company and get into a contract only to find out that they can't meet my needs. It's, again, just a bad situation to be in. So the risk that you do run in here, you have a false sense of security. You'll have people who will be like, just throw a firewall up. We're all magically safer behind firewalls. No, we're not. Not between a firewall that I'm using at a network perimeter and I'm doing certain network protection than I am for applications. There is a benefit, though, for security, migrated to the cloud. The thing is that for current staff, it's an easier transition. It kind of helps get them into that mindset. Also allows you to visualize and maybe understand your security posture a little bit better. So when I start thinking of the firewall in the cloud, especially network-related people who love network diagrams, that helps them put things together in their head a little easier. Management can understand things a little bit easier. It's just something to think about. And again, mitigation gets back to process. It really gets back to process. It's not even like, I have this application firewall, that application firewall, or this IPS, that IPS. One of the basic things I would say is, can your IPS keep up in the cloud? Is it going to be on, infrastructure that can actually power it? Because oftentimes what I found is that when you put IPS in the cloud, you end up turning certain functions off you'd like to probably have, and the reason why is because there's not enough resources sometimes in certain, virtual servers to even keep up. So Again, do your due diligence. Prep everything ahead of time. Know what you're getting yourself into. And that way, even your execution, your execution's that much easier. You okay?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, look like you've been having a little rough day there.
Yeah, I am.
All right. So international privacy compliance risk. So here's the other big thing. Commingling of data. So let's say I'm in the cloud. I've got all my users out there, but I've got German users and they're mixed in with Americans. Wouldn't be a problem, except that in Germany you have to keep German citizen data on-prem within the country's borders. In fact, only a German is allowed to touch them, supposedly. I don't know how well that can really be enforced, but it is something that you do have to take into consideration. Excuse me. No matter what, that data sitting on the cloud is still your problem. You do have to evaluate how you can move your data and how you segregate your data and keep, Canadian data, for example, they have certain restrictions you have to follow. How you keep that from getting commingled with your U.S. data as well as your EU data. So you need to understand exactly how your data is broken up and figure out what your strategy is going to be. In these days, if I've got a large corporation and I've got customers in all areas of the world, I will usually have a Canadian data center, a U.S. data center, and a data center in the EU. And depending upon how much business I have in certain countries, I may want to even put that EU data center, like in Germany. I might want to go ahead and put it in France. If I'm over in Asia, I might stick that one in Japan. But then again, I might stick it in Australia. It just depends on how I do it. Okay. So you definitely need to have some legal representation, understand how your data is going to work and where you're going to stick your data centers. I mean, it's one thing to go ahead and put your test one up here in Columbus, Ohio with Amazon, and you've got another backup one out in Oregon. That's great. But as soon as I start handling EU citizen data, the rules change. And in the case of, has anybody seen that the EU recently changed their laws where they can fine you up to 4% of your global profits? So just keep that in mind. If they feel that there's a privacy breach in excess, it's something fairly egregious, they can take financial actions against you. All right, so we're nearing the end here. So the big thing you have to remember, from a legal standpoint, it's your data. Almost all these contracts, even with SaaS providers, guess what? It's your data. They don't care. You give out the keys of the kingdom, it's your problem. They don't really care. What happens if my data provider gets broken into and the world comes to an end? They'll give you a piece of your money back. Everything okay? Nothing's on fire?
Nothing's on fire.
Great. Okay, just making sure. They'll give you a piece of your money back, but they can't give you all of your money back. And the reason why is because you, along with all your friends, got together and essentially bought a timeshare on a hard drive. So since you guys are part of this great timeshare that's sitting out there out in the cloud, if something goes bad, you're just going to lose probably, you might get the portion of money unused or unspent back. You might get a portion of your money back, but odds are you're not going to get your money back, and typically what I find is the data is worth more than the amount of money that you spend in the cloud. So keep that in mind. It's the reason why backups are critical. If you actually find a provider that's going to sign away all their rights, you should probably run away from them. Odds are their legal person probably doesn't know what they're doing. If you think about it, they have no incentive to do that. They really don't. So it's a really tight act you have to walk, and the burden really comes back to you. So even if you're sticking your data in the cloud for convenience, you've got to be able to recover your data quickly and to get it moved if something goes south really quickly. It's the burden is completely on your end. They're just going to simply close up shop, wipe their hands of it, and just walk away. So what's happening? I have yet to find an industry that's not really going into the cloud. Everybody's sticking something in the cloud. You name an industry, they're going into it. Everyone's sticking their data in the cloud. Why? Because it's convenient. It's easy. It's become, commodity based. we think about the portability, containerization, all that's really that next big wave that's kind of taking off right now. The other big thing is, this is my own, this is where I get into my own opinion of the cloud, is you haven't really seen that big cloud killer app. I mean, something that's like that big thing. ServiceNow and a couple of those things have gotten close. You've seen like things like Box. I mean, you really think about why Box was so lucrative to people. Box was so lucrative to people because the fact that it took everybody. Like my mom could do FTP. I can't even imagine trying to talk my mom through typing and doing the steps of FTPing something from point A to point B. Now my mom can be an FTP wizard with Box. You're going to see something like that where it's going to be something simple that's going to happen, and it's going to be like boom. It's the end. It's kind of like what social media are to kids. It's so simple and so easy that we should have thought about it sooner, and yet somebody finally does. You start thinking about automation in the cloud. The fun thing that you can definitely do with the cloud is you can automate the heck out of it. So, fun things you can do with automation: do your automated, log file transfers. You can also do certain scans. You can kick off things. Just recently, me and a coworker, she and I are working on, essentially, she's doing all the labor. I just kind of gave her inspiration and more of wisdom and help, but she's doing all the labor. But we essentially set up a malware lab in the cloud. We're testing all these EDR vendors out because we want to make sure that we know what we're doing with them. And what I found with EDR vendors are that they all part the Red Seas. So no matter what, even the crazy scenarios, we threw out these crazy scenarios that we knew in a million years would not possibly work. We still had vendors go, oh yeah, we can take care of that. Oh yeah, we can do that. I'm like, okay, you'll show us. Because we're going to set it up in the cloud, and we're going to run this lab. Well, imagine running 200 pieces of custom ransomware that encrypt everything, right? And you've got to essentially regenerate everything after it's encrypted all your data. That's an automation point. That's where you can do automation in the cloud. And we get through about 2 vendors a week. And in total, we're rebuilding the infrastructure about 1,000 times a week. That's how many different variants we put together. And that's how we're testing our EDR out. So we can put all that stuff in the cloud. Because it's kind of funny, we actually had one vendor who said, oh, you can do it on-prem. You can do it in production. We are not testing out anytime crypto ransomware, we are not doing that in production. Not in a million years. Not on our file and print servers. No, we are not doing that. They did, and guess what happened? We went in, we flipped a couple bits, I went right past it. Now they might be able to tell me that it's gotten infected with ransomware, when it's all crypto lockered up and what have you. But guess what? It doesn't do me any good when it's all basically damaged. So those are the types of cool things that you can do in a cloud. All types of fun things. You can set up your pen testing in the cloud, do vulnerability assessments through the cloud. Lots of cool fun things you can do there. Automation makes things easier. You start thinking about machine learning. You're starting to see elements of that get introduced to the cloud. You're starting to see things like Watson, where you can leverage IBM's machine learning. To me, that's really cool, where you can start to essentially have Watson talk back to people. So a lot of those chat bots that you have, that they try to trick you into thinking that it's a real person typing it in. It's Watson. Now that Watson's got that verbal piece to it, it can actually talk on the phones. It sounds like it's Sally, and they can give Sally different dialects from around the country. So it's crazy stuff like that that's starting to happen now in the cloud. So the single biggest question you want to ask your cloud vendor is this: where does your security end and my security begin? It is the single biggest question that you'll ask. It's the biggest problem that you'll get responses from. I just finally got everything clarified with Amazon. It took me about 9 months. I'm still not that far ahead with Microsoft and Google. They won't call me back. And IBM's really not good about calling me back. But that's what I'm trying to drive at is, where's that demarc point? No one can really answer the question. I find it very difficult for most vendors to answer that question. And it's simply because the salespeople don't know. And all they ever do is they refer me back to my legal guide. Especially Microsoft. Microsoft's like, go look at the legal guide. It'll tell you exactly what you're responsible for. So yeah. The one thing I would say in here, hopefully you consider coming to the ISSA InfoSec Summit. Connie down here, she helps run that. It's really called ConnieCon, in case you didn't know. She does a great job of doing those things. You can link in with me. You can look at my Twitter rantings. Twitter, I don't know. You need to have thick skin there. I do want to thank John Sanders, the guys at Secure Idea. They offer a great, at DerbyCon every year, they have a great Amazon security course. And the reason why I say it's great, and they actually developed it, was because they were trying to build pen test stuff in the cloud, and guess what happened? They didn't know any of this stuff, so they had to share their ideas with somebody, and they wanted to make some money off of it. And then finally, Albert Barron, the person that created Pizza as a Service. So, any questions? Was it good, informative, useful, helpful? Okay, great. I hope so. So thank you.
Sorry, any question that's come to mind?
Yeah.
Your experiment in the cloud with BSides.
Yeah.
Any one vendor come said it's service way another?
Any particular vendor? Actually, I'm telling Lydia that we should publish this. As much time as we spend on it, we should like publish a report or do something. It's kind of weird. I mean, it's like the big three, like the Silence, CrowdStrike, SentinelOne. They've done pretty well, but we can still trick them. There's some good stuff. It's good for kind of medium level, but if I've got even some good skills enough to know what I'm going up against, you can defeat it. I mean, it's not a hard thing to do.
Understand here? Even something else.